Sekata. Yes, yes, suit.
At times, it seems like Griftlands is trying to see how many good ideas it can stuff into itself without exploding. Strategic deck-building combat? Check. An addictive roguelike loop? Yup. Multiple storylines with compelling RPG elements? Uh-huh. Visual novel goodness with social links? That too. Even more incredibly, this hodgepodge of awesome components crammed together into one game creates something utterly unique and enduringly memorable. Griftlands is a deck-building roguelike in the same vein as genre standouts like Slay the Spire and Monster Train. The underlying idea of earning random cards battle by battle until you lose and do it all over again is the same. But the main way Griftlands distinguishes itself from those games is that each of its 3 campaigns tells a substantial story, and for the most part, they're all exceptional. Whether I was playing a mercenary on a quest for revenge, a retired soldier turned double agent who's playing both sides of a rebellion, or a blackout drunk slacker who's been disowned by his family, Griftlands' 3 distinct playable characters are all looking out for number 1. And no one around them is innocent or without ulterior motives. In the midst of this chaotic hive of ruthlessness and double crosses, you've got to learn quickly or become another sucker added to the pile of corpses. A perfect setup for a conflict-heavy roguelike if I've ever seen one. There was always something pushing me to complete each run or at least get to the next major plot development. My favorite character, Smith, is an idiotic, carousing, 2-legged dumpster fire of a person with practically no redeeming qualities, so I really related with him.
Besser Bibia?
His story centers around redeeming himself for a life wasted and the Disco Elysium-esque way in which he couldn't care less about anyone or anything around him was the ideal backdrop for my heartless plotting. Figuring out a strategy to make the right friends and mitigate, also known as murdering, my enemies continues to bring me no end of joy. The general outline of each campaign follows its same storyline each time, but the exact missions you're sent on, the characters involved, and the random encounters you stumble upon vary so that no 2 runs are quite the same. Even after completing all 3, the tongue-in-cheek fantasy world of con artists and thugs, goofy personalities, and hilarious dialogue were all just more reasons to try just one more run, even when I got my teeth knocked in at higher difficulties. Adding to the already substantial amount of charm is Griftlands' hand-drawn Saturday morning cartoon style and the bizarre-looking aliens and humans that share the world. Voice acting is done through a Sims-like gibberish language, meaning you'll be reading a lot, but at least the soundtrack is every bit as catchy as you'd hope from a game you're expected to spend a lot of time running through again and again.
So can I share? See at your bed!
What makes Griftlands especially interesting is that victory is not all about stabbing people in the front. Confrontation comes in 2 delicious flavors, social encounters called negotiations, and turn-based battles, both of which require you to curate and upgrade their own specific deck of cards. Battles are very similar to Slay the Spire, and equally challenging and replayable, where you and any allies or pets you might have knock the snot out of all manner of beasts, robots, and fellow grifters. Because combat in Griftlands can be brutally challenging on higher difficulties, creating the perfect mixture of defensive cards, offensive cards, status effects, and items is essential for survival. In one playthrough with Sal the Soldier, I stacked up cards that cause bleed damage to drain my opponent's health, while in another, I used Smith's bizarre ability to regenerate health by getting hammered and hurting himself to create an unstoppable, rampaging, drunken ogre. Negotiations, on the other hand, are complex contests of wits, where you use persuasion and coercion cards to whittle down the enemy's core argument in an almost incomprehensible flurry of status effects, like a modifier that makes it harder to win if you have a reputation for being violent or untrustworthy. Similar to battles, there are multiple approaches for getting your opponent to see things your way. You can focus on domination cards, which use threats, insults, and coercion, or you can try influence cards, which use swagger, persuasion, and tact. Negotiations arguably have even more strategy than battles though, because all of those status effects require you to continually reevaluate your plans, which can be fun or a bit annoying depending on the circumstances. But if you lean too hard into combat instead, you'll make a lot of enemies, and that's a great way to get yourself killed in a place where everyone remembers your bad choices. So even though each campaign can be beaten in a few hours if you're good or lucky, the sheer replayability of Griftlands is staggering. There are tons of unlockables, modifiers, and alternate game modes, like one that cuts out the story entirely and gets you right to the action. As with most deck building games, you'll also unlock prestige difficulties with each new tier you've conquered, and gain access to new cards for the next run, so the challenge doesn't stop at your first victory. This ingenious blend of RPG mechanics, of visual novel-style storytelling, and deck-building roguelike gameplay is a beautiful recipe for a kind of game I never knew I wanted. Even though I've already spent the past week getting through each of Griftlands' campaigns multiple times, I'm still looking forward to my next run, and the run after that. Campaigns are short and challenging, making them highly replayable and memorable adventures that reward your time. It's kind of absurd that such an eclectic group of mechanics work together in such harmony, but once you're bitten by their charms, it's quite hard to put Griftlands down. For more, check out our reviews of Curse of the Dead Gods and Returnal, and for everything else, stick with IGN.